What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Thursday, June 11th, 2015. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. We have lots and lots of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Don is sitting in our control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. A little correction to our program note of yesterday. Alex Newman, co-author of Crimes of Educators, will be our guest next Wednesday, not Tuesday. Turned out there was a little bit of a schedule conflict, so that's on for next Wednesday. And tomorrow in our third hour, the lovely Lady Claire will be joining us to co-host that final hour and give us her unique perspective on the world. Now, turning to the news here, over in the Republic of Lugansk and Donetsk, they have issued a joint statement declaring their desire to join Russia. This is a repeat of what Crimea did. I understand why Lugansk and Donetsk did this, but they have put Putin in a heck of a spot. And I don't envy him his job right now, because if he rejects them, the world will denounce him as a coward, because after all, they accepted Crimea. And if he accepts, that is just going to escalate the situation and open the door for direct U.S. military involvement. And by the way, there is U.S. military hardware on the ground in Ukraine, ostensibly as part of a joint exercise for training purposes only. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink, say no more. And as soon as the exercise is over, the U.S. government promises that all that heavy artillery and equipment will leave Ukraine. Sure it will. And then we'll all flap our arms and fly to the moon and look at Saddam's stash of nuclear weapons and the recovering economy. All righty, let's see. Well, we're going to go ahead and grab a phone call here. Brian in Pennsylvania. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you just fine.
I've been meaning to call in all week, and I just don't have the time, so I end up watching your show after it's over, and that's why I keep wanting to call in. But
it's hard to call into that, yes, I know.
My mom told me about this on Monday, and I just had to tell you, because this is just, please wait to, laugh your ass off at this, okay?
Okay.
My mom works for a community program, and they have healthcare programs where you can join in and everything, like most corporations and businesses have, okay?
Yes.
She told me that they're adding a new plan that lowers the cost of your initial healthcare to $500 a month. Okay. But the kicker is there is a $5,000 deductible for it.
Yes.
I was like, how could anybody use that? How is that possible?
Well, that's true of all the Obamacare-compliant insurance policies. They're hideously expensive, and they're going to go up by double digits as of next year, and they have sky-high deductibles, $10,000 or more, and all kinds of exclusions. You are definitely being forced to pay much more money for much less benefit, that being the hallmark of a fascist economic dictatorship, and a lot of people have been burned by this whole Obamacare, thinking they had insurance because they signed up at the exchanges, and either the insurance won't cover their medical bills, or there's been a computer snafu and they're not actually covered, even though they were sending in the money, the policies didn't exist. It's just been a complete and utter disaster. Unfortunately, we seem to be underneath a president whose ego will never allow him to admit he's messed up. And that's why they're still out there saying, oh, Obamacare is great. It's the signature accomplishment of our administration, and humans are warming the world. And now, of course, I'm watching on Fox News, there's this big stink going on because a former member of Obama's administration has come out to say that, at least for the moment in Iraq, ISIS is winning, and Obama's out there saying, no, they aren't. They aren't. I am triumphant. I am ascendant. And, it's a war of egos. And I understand, ego is necessary in dealing with politics, but you shouldn't be allowing ego to set national policy. And that there seems to be a lot of that, way too much of that going on right now.
It's just mind-blowing. I don't know. I told my mom, I was like, you might as well, cause she pays $1,200 a month for insurance.
Yeah.
And she was considering it, but I was like, don't even go to that. It's, unless you get cancer, you can't use that insurance. It's virtually impossible.
Well, they're all like that, and even though she's paying $1,200 a month for her health insurance, she better look at that deductible, because that is really the whammy most people are not aware of. The Obamacare compliant insurance policies, the deductibles have gone way, way up. The vast majority of people who have been forced to buy these policies will never actually use them because they just don't get that sick during the year to use up the deductible. So they're being forced to buy health insurance, and yet the cost of their medical care has been dropped back on them. Sweet deal for the health insurance companies. And they were expecting to make, billions and billions of dollars in runaway profits. Unfortunately, it hasn't worked because Obamacare's just turned into a complete and total meltdown. And they can't even figure out who is getting who is supposed to get the subsidies or not. It's locked up. It's a complete, utter disaster. And the fault for that, of course, is Obama insisting on the original launch date, even though everybody around him was saying, this is not ready to go. And Obama, with his almighty ego, it's my name on there. I said it would launch on this day, and it will launch on this day. And then we find out that every time it met the enrollment goal that he stated, we then found out that that was a complete lie. This man is incapable of admitting he's made a mistake or done something wrong, and that is a very, very dangerous trait in a man who's got the keys to the nuclear missiles.
All right, thanks, Mike. You keep up the great work. I just wanted to let you know about that crazy-ass healthcare plan.
Well, they're all that way. They are all that way right now, and that's the Affordable Care Act did not make health care affordable to Americans. It absolutely did not. All right, so we're talking about Russia and Ukraine. Now, yesterday we were commenting on this situation where the Pope met with Vladimir Putin and basically told Putin that sincere peace efforts are needed for Ukraine, and really Putin ought to do what he can to calm these things down, which Putin is already doing, by the way. But the implication was from the Pope that somehow this situation in Ukraine is all Putin's fault. And my comment at that point was, you're talking to the wrong guy, Pope. It's Poroshenko and Obama who are setting up this bloodbath in Ukraine, all in the name of their imperial designs. Then we find out today, in a story from Russia Today, apparently before the Pope met with Putin, he took a meeting with the U.S. ambassador. And the ambassador said, this is all Russia's fault. The U.S. basically lectured the Pope. And basically prepped him to go into the Putin meeting saying Putin's the one who's got to pull back. The Pope got rolled, by the way. Apparently the imaginary playmate in the sky didn't tap him on the shoulder and say, Pope, the guy from the U.S. is lying to you. He's breaking that commandment, thou shalt not bear false witness. Ooh, boy, look at all the false witness they're putting out there right now. We are getting reports that some 8,000 Kiev troops are currently surrounded near the village of Debaltsevo in Donbass. The militia cut off the only road linking the pocket to Kiev-held territory. They basically went on out there. They got themselves cut off. The 8,000 Kiev troops have been offered the chance to surrender peacefully and just walk away. And probably a lot of them will do just that. Either join with the eastern Ukrainian republics or just go on into Russia. A lot of that been happening. Heavy shelling has hit the Donetsk train station. Unfortunately, it was not confined to the train station. There is video footage coming out of residential areas in Donetsk burning after heavy overnight shelling. Kiev doesn't care to pick their targets. They're just going to shoot the shells, and whatever it hit, that's what we wanted to aim at here. Now, over in Germany, in response to the commentary coming out of the G7, the chief economist at Bremer Landsbank, Volker Hellmeyer, is saying Obama is destroying Europe with the economic sanctions against Russia. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And an alert listener caught me in a bit of a goof here. The story about the surrounded troops in Ukraine was emailed to me by somebody today as being current news, and I should have been more careful reading the date. It's from last January, so we've got very alert listeners, and yes, I'm willing to admit it when I make a mistake, something you will not see on the corporate media, or for that matter, the White House. Moving on, before we went to the commercial break, we were talking about this chief economics officer at the Bremer Landsbank, Volker Hellmeier, who was saying that because of Obama's sanctions against Russia, German exports have declined year over year by 18% in 2014 and dropped by 34% in the first 2 months of 2015. And he says the damage is actually more comprehensive than the statistics indicate because those are primary losses and do not measure secondary effects where suppliers to those companies have to cut their revenue because the exporters aren't needing as much raw materials. And the attitude that is coming out of Washington, D.C. is no price is too great for others to pay as long as we get those gosh darn Ruskies. That's all that matters. We've got that idea. Get the Ruskies, and we don't care who gets hurt in the process because America is exceptional and Obama is exceptional and we don't have to care the damage we cause to other people. We're the United States. Alrighty, moving right along. Not too surprisingly, Israel has sent yet another delegation to the United States, to Washington, D.C. They'll arrive next Monday to give what is politely termed their last-minute critiques of the looming Iran deal. They're not going to be critiquing. They're going to be screaming, look, we gave you all that money to destroy this deal and start a war, and that's what we want. Now, over in Iran, their government is out there saying that it's time to face up to the hard reality. The Western powers, primarily the United States, are supplying all of these so-called terrorists with weapons to destabilize the Middle East and ultimately target Iran. And they're talking about all these very convenient situations where ISIS is able to capture weapons. And they have documented cases continuing, ongoing, where American planes, supply planes, are landing in ISIS-controlled airfields to supply these groups with weapons, money, and foodstuff. And we now have that declassified document confirming that ISIS in Syria was manufactured by the U.S. as a proxy to get rid of Assad. Now, speaking of Assad and Iran, the propaganda is flying thick and fast in both directions here. And the new spin out there is, oh, look at all the money Iran is spending to prop up Assad. You know, it's okay for us to pour billions in there to get Assad out of there, but Iran is evil for putting money into Syria to keep the current government in place. Our financial support for terror is good, and Iran's financial support to the legitimate government is bad. And what's going on here is they're not getting traction screaming about how the P5+1 deal ought to be killed because Iran can't be trusted. Because Iran is the only party in this whole debate who doesn't have a long track record of lying to us about things like Saddam's nuclear weapons. Or, oh my goodness, it's Egypt attacking the USS Liberty. So they're changing tactics and saying the best reason to block the P5+1 deal is because Iran might take the sanctions relief billions they'd be getting, and they might spend it on things the U.S. and Israel don't like. That's the new spin. That's the new propaganda out there. So why is Israel still so concerned about derailing the P5+1 and getting a war with Iran going? Well, obviously their long-term objective is they want to see Iran broken up as a regional power. They want Iran brought under private central banking. But there's a more immediate agenda. The word is circulating around the European Union that they're preparing sanctions not against Russia, not against Iran, not against Syria, but against Israel. Because they're all getting sick and tired of Israel's behavior toward the Palestinians, and they think the time has come to resolve this matter once and for all. Now, this is the EU, not the United Nations. And what that means is Washington, D.C. can't stop it. Every time the United Nations wants to try and get this situation with the Palestinians resolved, the U.S. will go into the Security Council meeting and they'll go, oh, veto, 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 veto. Because that's what Israel wants them to do. But the U.S. can't veto anything the EU does. They're not actually a member of the European Union, thank goodness. And so Israel's concern right now, the reason they're really willing to do anything to get a major war in the Middle East and with Iran going, is because the instant the P5+1 deal is signed and Iran's non-existent nuclear weapons is no longer a political hot potato, world attention is going to turn back to Israel's war crimes against the Palestinians. Everybody understands that the only reason the United Nations did not add Israel to the list of nations that are abusive of children in war zones is because of political pressure coming from the United States. Nobody's believing that Israel doesn't commit these crimes. Israel's whole attitude is, we're going to do whatever we want to do, but you're an anti-Semite if you talk about it. And that is wearing thin. And Israel understands that once Iran is no longer center stage on the global political theater, the focus is going to turn right back to them, to Palestine, to the illegal settlements in the West Bank, to all the children who've been killed in all these ridiculous invasions of Gaza, the absolute ludicrousness of uncorking modern high-tech weapons on a helpless captive population because some unknown party fired a homemade firework rocket across the fence into an empty dirt lot. And Israel is desperate to avoid that. I mean, they're already feeling the pressure from boycott, divestment, and sanctions. And the momentum is there. The world has the initiative against Israel's continued tyranny against the Palestinians and subversion of our own governments. And they're feeling very much in a corner. Good reason for Israel to set off a dirty bomb in the U.S. and blame those gosh darn Muslims for it. And I think it's something that is under consideration, because of all the propaganda about how, ISIS has enough radioactive material to create a dirty bomb, and all the warnings about Israel needing a false flag right now. And, of course, going back to the story where Israel has been building and testing radioactive dirty bombs down in the Negev, ostensibly in fear of enemy attacks. Right. Now, when we come back from this next commercial break, I'm going to take you on a little trip down memory lane back to the Oklahoma City bombing and a repeat of the pattern that is unfolding in the Negev desert and why we should be concerned. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're talking about Israel, and they're playing around with radioactive dirty bombs out in the Negev. Now, you need to keep in mind, Israel is a master of the false flag attack. They've used it throughout their history, whether it was the Lavon affair, USS Liberty, tricking Reagan into bombing Libya, 9/11, USS Cole. This is what Israel does, to trick other people into making war on Israel's enemies. And there's absolutely no question that while Israel desires a war with Iran, they want American kids to be killed and crippled fighting it. So we're seeing this report that Israel has been building and testing radioactive dirty bombs down in the Negev, ostensibly for defensive purposes only. Okay, now, going on back to the Oklahoma City bombing. In the months before that happened, the BATF was building and exploding truck bombs at a secret facility in New Mexico, ostensibly to learn how to defend against them, which is kind of hard to do once they go off. Now, the BATF official in charge of those New Mexico tests was named Harry Everhart, and he just happened to be in Oklahoma City, within eyesight of the Murrah building when it was destroyed. And he was the person who telephoned in the initial report saying someone has just blown up the federal building in Oklahoma City with a truckload of ANFO. How did he know? I mean, think about it. Unless he built that bomb himself, how does he know what was in the truck? And, of course, General Benton K. Parton, who was a U.S. weapons development expert, showed how just the truck bomb itself could not have done the damage. And there were reports of additional bombs found in the building. I have a page on the Oklahoma City bombing if you want to go and look at all the evidence of that false flag. But the point I'm trying to make, Israel is in a panic. BDS is taking off across the globe. Nobody is buying Israel's permanent victimhood. Everybody knows Israel is a nuclear-armed state. They are not they're not facing existential threat from their neighbors. They are, in fact, the power in that region and wish to remain that way. And everybody in countries, whether it's the U.S. or Canada or Great Britain or France, are just sick and tired of living under governments that dive into Tel Aviv on a regular basis. Israel's in real trouble. Now we're hearing, of course, that the European Union is going to step in where the United Nations feared to tread and bring sanctions against Israel until they resolve this issue with the Palestinians and set up two states and actually draw their borders, something Israel has never officially done in the entire 60-odd years of its history. Israel's map is written with dry erase marker because they're always trying to push the borders. Yesterday we were talking about how Israel's demanding the world recognize their annexation of the Golan. You know, we stole it fair and square. It's time you just admit that and say it's just part of Israel. Now, it's not part of Syria anymore. It's part of Israel. And every time Israel gets into a panic like this, there's a big bang somewhere that gets blamed on Israel's enemies. And we're seeing multiple indications that they're seriously considering doing it again. Now, Netanyahu's new ultra-right cabinet, just slightly to the right of Attila the Hun, has now officially rejected the idea of a two-state solution and declared it to be Israel's policy that they are simply going to annex the West Bank and Gaza and say this is now all Israel. And they'll just kick the Palestinians out at that point. That's what Israel is saying. Yes, it's an illegal occupation. We're going to solve it by simply saying we own it all. That's Israel's idea of Middle Eastern peace. We want a piece of that. We want a piece of this. We want a piece over here, and we'll just take all that chunk over there. Now, Israel is definitely on the war path against freedom of speech, both within Israel and without. They're literally trying to have it declared a crime to criticize Israel by simply saying any criticism of the government of Israel is just anti-Semitism and Jew hate, which is like saying any criticism of the Nazis is just German hate and anti-Aryanism and should be dismissed. That's how silly and absurd it is. But that's what they've been getting away with all this time. There is a new law being considered in Israel that basically declares any criticism of Israel's government being an attack on the legitimacy of Israel as a whole, the legitimacy of Israel to exist as a Jewish state. So they're trying to silence any criticism and try to do it underneath the force of law, because they know they cannot win these debates on the facts and logic of what's going on. So they scramble to the courts and say, we will make it illegal to say that the earth is round, and we will make it illegal to say this and that, which we've seen throughout history. Look what they did to Galileo. When tyrants decide that they cannot win an argument with the facts and logic, they simply say it's illegal to say. Look at how many laws they're trying to get passed to criminalize even asking questions about the Orthodox story of the Holocaust, even in light of how many of the claims made in that story have been completely discredited as science catches up with the lies. Those bars of soap were not made out of human beings. They were made out of pig fat. Not a lot of it was a wartime soap. There were no lampshades or gloves made out of human skin. It was goat skin. Ground-penetrating radar at Treblinka shows there are no mass graves. The strata is undisturbed from how it was laid down during the last ice age. And on and on and on and on. Throughout history, from Galileo to Zundel, only lies and liars resort to the courts to enforce adherence to dogma. And that's not freedom of speech. It's not freedom at all. That's tyranny and dictatorship on full display with a flashing neon sign for everybody to see. Meanwhile, the U.S. and Israel Air Forces have signed a strategic cooperation agreement. It's a very simple system. Israel decides what needs to be bombed, and American kids go bomb it. Now, here's an interesting story. Yesterday, we had this report of an attempted suicide bombing, terror attack in the parking lot near Luxor, near the giant temple that's there. And fortunately, when the bomb went off, not a lot of people got hurt. Today, the Egyptian police have arrested a U.S. embassy worker on terror charges. They arrested this guy at the U.S. Embassy in Cairo on suspicion of participation in terrorism-related activities. Nobody is making that link between the bombing yesterday and the fact that today the Egyptian police are looking for who did it, but they did arrest a U.S. Embassy worker. So this bombing at Luxor may have been another U.S. covert action. Let's see. Up in Poland, their parliament speaker and 3 ministers have resigned over this scandal in which there were secret tape recordings made of government ministers' conversations that were then leaked publicly. And it's triggered a whole corruption scandal and outrage. And apparently these ministers, the parliament speaker, and several other politicians and a chief advisor to the prime minister have all resigned. Apparently something really ugly was uncovered there. The entire government of Poland may be in serious, serious trouble. All right. Pardon me. I seem to have a bit of a cold today. The State Department is out there saying that you might as well kick back and relax. Overcoming ISIS in Iraq will take 3 to 5 years, which is what they said originally, and we've gone on for almost 15. They knew it was going to be a long war all along. They just didn't want to tell you until it was too late to get out of it. Oh, they'll be welcoming us with kisses and flowers and all the rest of that. How many more times do you have to be lied at until you understand this government controls you with lies, fraud, and deception? We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And let's see. We're talking about Iraq. And apparently, and we knew this was coming. The U.S. is now considering more military bases in Iraq to fight ISIS. Actually, they're fighting the Iraqi people who are trying to take their country back from foreign puppet rule. That's what's going on with all these countries the U.S. is having to invade over and over and over again. Went into Yemen, kicked out their government, put in a puppet. The people of Yemen are kicking the puppet out. That's why we have to go back to war there, using Saudi Arabia as a proxy. Still trying to get Assad out after almost 4 years, using ISIS as a proxy. And having created this uber monster, which we know the U.S. government created ISIS. They've got a big paintbrush now. Anytime anybody in any country stands up and tries to kick out their foreign puppet rulers, the U.S. media just paints them with a paintbrush. Oh, must be ISIS. Don't think about them, just they're bad. You don't even consider that they might have a legitimate gripe against their leadership, working for the U.S. Corporations. Just hate them and throw your money and your children at them. Now, they're calling the new policy in Iraq the lily pad approach of lots of little bases all over the country to garrison the place. In Vietnam, they called it the fire bases, and it didn't work. There's a lesson out of Vietnam that appears to have been forgotten in our current leadership. You cannot win a ground war from the air. And already they're out there bragging about how they've sent in planes to bomb suspected ISIS facilities all over the place. They were doing that in Vietnam. Suspected truck parks. They blew up on a lot of lumber and not much else. Now, regardless of who started Iraq, it's Obama's problem now. It's an unauthorized war. You probably heard on the SRN news break where they're trying to scramble and say, well, it's time for Congress to get on the bandwagon here and say, yes, the president has Congress's permission to proceed. And, of course, that's backward. The president isn't supposed to declare war until Congress says, you, executive branch, execute the war we have decided on. But he's escalating it and cranking it up because they're in a situation where they can't lose any one of these client states, these puppet regimes, these conquered provinces. They can't lose even one, or the whole system of empire starts to unravel just like it did with ancient Rome. Which gets us on down to Guatemala. And you probably have not heard a lot about Guatemala in the corporate media. It turns out there's a revolution going on down there. And it's already forced much of the government to resign. And it looks like the president is not going to survive much longer. Gee, why aren't we seeing any news about that going on? Well, I'll tell you why. Because all the way back in 1954, just 1 year after they did it to Iran, the CIA went in and kicked up a fuss and ousted President Jacobo Arbenz, and installed the first in a long line of dictators that have ruled Guatemala on behalf of the United States corporations ever since. This actually triggered a civil war that ran from 1960 to 1996. 36 years of nonstop civil war with massive atrocities committed by the U.S.-backed military dictatorship. The Civil War ended basically when everybody ran out of bodies to throw into it. And what appears to be happening in Guatemala today is, again, the people of a nation trying to kick out a U.S. puppet government. And the U.S. is stretched way too thin. They may not have the resources to go back into Guatemala and whip those people back down into subservience. And the Guatemalan people may realize it. That's why they're acting now. They may actually succeed, and that's why the corporate media doesn't want to talk about it, because it will be a huge embarrassment for the U.S. All righty, as you know, they're coming up on an EU referendum in Great Britain, whether or not to fully merge with the European Union or simply break clean completely. Great Britain's been sort of in this halfway state of being part of the EU, but still keeping their own currency. A lot of politicians want to merge with the EU because that puts them on the line to the presidency of the EU itself, and they want that. They want that crown. Most people in Great Britain do not want to be part of the EU because they've seen what the EU has done to Cyprus, to Greece, to France, to Spain, to Italy, to Portugal, to everybody. Even Germany. Germany's powerhouse economy is taking a hit from all this accumulated manufactured debt being spread all over everybody. Now, interestingly enough, the British government is making a big deal about having an independent watchdog monitor the BBC broadcasts about the coverage of the referendum to make sure that the BBC is not showing any bias. The British government is out there saying, we are going to make sure that you are getting honest and fair reports from the BBC. It's a fake out. Forget BBC. BBC can't really have that much of an impact. What they need to be looking at, what they need an independent eye on, are those vote counters, especially after what we saw in the Scottish independence referendum. They weren't even trying to hide the vote fraud. It was just right there out in the open. And they're going to do it again in the EU referendum to enslave the people of Great Britain to that European Central Bank. I guarantee you there is going to be epidemic election fraud on this upcoming referendum. But the government wants you to think the problem is over at the BBC, the Brits Buggering Children Network. It's a fake out. Get everybody looking over at the BBC. Make sure they're being fair and honest and you're not keeping an eye on those people actually counting the ballots. Remember what Stalin said. People who vote decide nothing. People who count the votes decide everything. And that's exactly what's been going on in Scotland, in Cyprus, in Greece, in Great Britain, and certainly here in the United States of America. Election fraud is out of control and epidemic. They don't even seem to care if you know it or not. Now, the Greek economy is basically in a tailspin. The IMF has cut off all negotiations. Every day that passes in Greece, 59 businesses go out of business, 613 jobs. All suppliers inside Greece are demanding payment in advance. Nobody is doing invoicing anymore because the economy is in such serious, serious trouble. For all intents and purposes, Greece may have already broken off from the European Union. Not in terms of saying we're leaving, but I mean literally cracked off economically and plunged into the ocean. And Greece's government is approaching BRICS, about merging with them, writing off the European debt and saying, we don't care if the Europeans come out and be tourists here anymore, because they don't have any money to be tourists with. Now, up in Ukraine, their bonds plunge after their American financial minister, remember the big stink Poroshenko brought in all these foreigners to run the Kiev government, and their American financial minister is saying that Ukraine will intentionally default on its debt unless all of its creditors, which include both Russia and the U.S. taxpayer, give them more money right now. In other words, we're going to refuse to pay you the money that we already owe you unless you loan us more money. Boy, don't you wish you could get that deal with your credit card companies or your mortgage? You know, give me another couple of $1 million for a bigger house or I won't make the mortgage payment this month. That's basically what Ukraine is doing. And Ukraine's bonds are not the only ones in trouble. There's a very alarming article in the Telegraph, no less. There is a bond crash going on across the world. And they're talking about how the yields have gone completely out of control. And they're basically saying, you know, this is not really being reported to ordinary people on the street, but there is a bond crash going on. And my question is, and this is not being reported, what are the derivatives based on those bonds doing right now? And this gets back to an article we linked to earlier in the week saying that in point of fact, there is a derivatives meltdown going on right now that is being kept quiet to avoid more panic. But I think this article in the Telegraph is going to be informing a lot of people. The bond market is coming apart. We'll be back after our top of the hour news break. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show again. Hour number 2. Phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. I'm watching the Fox News feed, and they're already out there saying, will 450 additional U.S. troops in Iraq be enough to help in the fight against ISIS? So they're already dropping this nonsense about advisors and trainers. They're saying, these are troops. They're there to fight ISIS. 450 isn't enough. We're into the third invasion of Iraq because those gosh darn Iraqi people won't stay conquered. Don't they understand the rules we made up for them? We're going to take a phone call here. John in Barbados, aloha. Welcome back to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. Yeah, I want to go back to the economy. What I'm looking at is the bond market is seizing up and yields are going up. The derivative market is collapsing as well. On top of that, we see that German trade with the world is going down the pan, same as Chinese trade. Basically, world trade is grinding to a halt. We see the Baltic Dry Index bumping along the bottom, and even that is being
well, say Germany and Europe in general got hit with a double whammy because if you look at America's trade imbalance, where we're buying and consuming a lot of imported products, some $40 billion a month that we import, for which there are no matching exports. That, despite the size of that number, though, American imports have shrunk as the American people don't have the money to go on consuming. That was part of the problem, especially hit China, because China was supplying most of their exported goods to the U.S. markets, which are drying up. Then the U.S. comes along with these ridiculous sanctions against Iran and Russia and everybody else that basically slaps their economy up other side of the face, especially in Germany. That's why that banker was out there saying Obama's policies trying to push the war toward Russia are already causing tremendous harm in Europe. Even at the G7 leaders said, yeah, these sanctions are really hurting us. They're going to hurt us even more, but yeah, we'll go along with what the United States wants to make stink face at Putin for a little while longer.
Yeah, well, that reminds me of what Osama bin Laden said in 1999. And he said, well, it was quite a statement. What he said was, we don't want to win this war against America. All we need to do is keep America fighting. And they are. They're fighting in Afghanistan. They're fighting in Iraq. They're fighting in Yemen. They're fighting everywhere. Keep them fighting. and America will go bankrupt, which is precisely the position that America is in at the moment.
Well, Osama bin Laden, was basically another one of these U.S. manufactured enemies. I mean, you need to go back and remember, the bin Laden family were all cozy with the Bushes. They got all these government contracts for construction on U.S. military bases. Osama's older brother, Salam bin Laden, was business partners with George W. Bush in a failed venture called Arbusto Energy. Then after it went bust, Salam died in a single plane crash. But Osama bin Laden was not a lifelong adherent of Islam. We've got photos of him just, living the rich kid's life in Europe, dressing in turtleneck sweaters and having a sports car and lots of hot girlfriends. But he was basically recruited by the Central Intelligence Agency. His code name was Tim Osman. That was his cover name when he was with the CIA. And they basically sent him in there to be this figurehead, this ultimate terror villain. And, he was in the hospital. In July of 2001, the CIA visited him at the American hospital in Riyadh and said, we know you're not long for this world here, but as a farewell gift, we're going to make you famous and you're going to be in the history books. And Tim Osman said, sure, okay. And they blamed him for 9/11. And then, of course, bin Laden died in December of that year of Marfan syndrome, I think it was, natural causes. And every bin Laden since then has been as phony as the bin Laden they killed in Abbottabad. It's all show. It's all lies, fraud, and deception. But as far as...
I agree with all that, Michael.
Okay, as far... My show, John, let me talk. As far as the U.S. bankrupting itself with all these wars, that was actually the U.S. strategy against the former Soviet Union, to get them tangled up in all of these little ongoing conflicts, the Star Wars program, and just bankrupt them, trying to keep up with the U.S. And now that same policy, tactic, strategy is now working in reverse against the United States. And yeah, we're hovering at the edge of bankruptcy. America's weapons are the most expensive in the world, and they're really not very good. And yeah, I'm absolutely convinced the U.S. government is going to collapse the same way the former Soviet Union did. And the sooner it happens, the better for all mankind.
I'm looking at this whole litany of nonsense and lies that have been told for years. But eventually, all these so-called CIA manufactured jihadists or what have you, they always go off the rails and turn against their masters. They have done. They did when they formed the jihad to fight the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, and eventually they've now turned around and are fighting the U.S. in Afghanistan.
Well, that's because
they don't stay loyal.
That's because. Okay, I guess John decided he didn't want to share the mic with me here anymore. The reason that happened was very simple. Once the Soviet Union was driven out of Afghanistan, the U.S. simply dropped all support and walked away. They left the Taliban as the de facto government, and the Taliban by the way, Taliban is Afghan for student, because it was the college students who were leading the fight toward independence and were co-opted against the Soviet Union. And then all of a sudden they woke up one morning, the U.S. was out of there, and they were the government. They said, all right, we're going to run this place for the benefit of Afghanistan and the Afghani people. And one of the first things they did was they absolutely shut down the opium trade. And that, of course, caused tremendous financial harm to the American drug lords, who counted on Afghanistan opium as a major supply for their market. And one of the first things that happened when the U.S. went back into Afghanistan, the poppies started blooming, bumper crops all over. And we have posted the pictures many, many times of opium fields growing in Afghanistan, the opium being harvested and shipped and guarded by uniformed coalition soldiers heading for the streets near you. All right, now then, getting on back to the economy. The U.S. debt to gross domestic product is where it was at the end of World War II, when they had borrowed and overspent to beat those gosh darn Nazis and those Japanese. We're not even into this new world war for real, and already we're suffering the same debt to GDP ratio as if we'd already fought it. and it's only going to get worse from here. Now, there's a very interesting story coming out of Investment Watch blog where apparently COMEX was coming up short for gold deliveries on their contracts that were coming due. And at the last second, J.P. Morgan just shipped in a whole bunch of gold to cover the shortfall. And nobody's sure where that gold came from. They may just be taking what gold they've got and shuffling it around like a pea underneath walnut shells. If you go back and you look at that story that we did for America's Book of Secrets, where there are rumors of a tunnel from the Federal Reserve to J.P. Morgan's vaults. And there are indications in this article I put up here that the gold J.P. Morgan threw into the COMEX so that they could make their deliveries this month actually originated with the Federal Reserve. And they're not going to be able to keep up this charade much longer. People are demanding physical. They don't want paper. They don't want the contracts. They want physical. And sooner or later, they're going to come up short. They're not going to have the gold. And by the way, anybody of you taking physical delivery from either J.P. Morgan, COMEX, or the Federal Reserve, you test those bars for tungsten. Because too many of those bars have already come out proving to be fakes. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. Fox News is now showcasing Maryland Sheriff Mike Lewis, who's out there saying, "You're all thankless people. You just have no respect for what the police departments are doing and what they have to put up with. And, really, these attacks on the police just because we murder a bunch of innocent people. I mean, really, it's a small price to pay for safe streets." And I talk about whining. And it's become a ubiquitous symptom of our society as a whole. Nobody wants to fix the problems. They just want to stop people from talking about it. They think all the world's evils can be solved with good public relations, which, of course, is what the public relations firms themselves are saying, because that's how they get their business. Public relations is a polite, fancy term for being paid to lie to the people. But no, public relations wears thin. There is a police brutality problem. There is a problem with the police not complying with the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And as long as they continue to do so, no, we will not have any respect or sympathy for the police department. We're going to grab a phone call here. Ivan in Ohio. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, hi, Mike. Hey, I haven't got a chance to listen to today's show, but I was on Ron Gibson's watching yesterday's video, and they were wondering, they were on the discussion there in the, under the video, they were wondering whatever happened to Scotty in Wisconsin.
I don't know. He may have gotten bored with the show.
I was like thinking, well, he did kind of sound old or whatever, but
unfortunately, I've been doing radio since 2007, and the reality is that some of the people who used to call in the show are no longer with us. I don't talk about it a lot. Some of them, on a better note, they get a new job, they go back to work, and obviously they can't call into the show during then, and I'm perfectly okay with that, their lives get better and they don't need to hang out here. That's wonderful. I'll be very honest about this whole situation. I would be very happy if there was no need for either the website or this radio show. If the economy was booming and people were happily employed and able to pay their bills and we could rely on the government to treat us with respect and the corporate media to be truthful, I would happily shut all of this stuff down and spend the rest of my life as Claire's roadie to get her music out there.
Oh, me too. It just gets old trying to put the word out, or
it's very tiring. But as long as that need is there, I'm going to be here. This certainly is.
I've been hammering at this since like 2008. But another thing I wanted to tell you, you were talking about food, like the other day, and how the food banks are getting really hit. Well, up at my church, they get from our local Akron area food bank here. And they haven't been able to get meat for like 2 weeks now. Going on 3. So.
Yeah, it's going to be an issue. And of course, we now the chicken and egg supply is tightening up because of the bird flu. situation. And around here in Hawaii, we can't get anything from any of the local supermarkets. Their orders from corporate headquarters are destroy it before you give it away, because that'll force people to come in and buy the food. Well, if they could afford to come in and buy the food, we wouldn't need the food pantries, the food programs. So, it's corporate thinking has just gotten totally skewed, where their entire universe are those stacks of ink and paper tickets, and they're oblivious to every other concern around them. That's unhealthy. Okay, even John Nash proved in his doctoral dissertation, you've got to have the wide view if you're going to improve society as a whole. Nobody wanted to listen to him, though. They wanted to go on worshiping Adam Smith, because Adam Smith's attitude is, if everybody's personally greedy, society will advance as a whole. And Nash proved that that was absolutely not going to work. But, the Wall Street money junkies, they want to believe that being money junkies is good for planet Earth, even though we can all look around and see that that absolutely is not the case.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's all I wanted, Mike. Okay, you take care.
All right, thank you very much for the phone call. Now, getting on back to the economic news, the IMF itself is now acknowledging that Iceland's economy improved from throwing bankers in the jail and letting the crooked banks go bust instead of bailing them out at taxpayer expense. Even the IMF is saying Iceland did the right thing. Of course, we're never going to do it here in the United States. We're not Iceland, we believe that powerful executives are above the law here. That's just the way it is, and I'm sure it's in the Constitution somewhere. Now, Zimbabwe, we make fun of them because they've had these amazing paper notes that say $100 trillion. And I actually just gave mine away to somebody, and now it's going to be a collector's item, because Zimbabwe is now officially demonetizing. They're ending their own internal paper currency. The current exchange rate, they're going to start using the U.S. dollar internally. And the current exchange rate is a $5 U.S. Federal Reserve note in exchange for 175 quadrillion Zimbabwe dollars. That is how out of control the inflation got from the Zimbabwe Private Central Bank. All right, so let's talk about these trade agreements. Trans-Pacific Partnership, Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, and now we're finding out there's a whole cluster of these trade agreements that are so secret the public's not even being told about their existence. Now, over in Europe, there's something kind of interesting going on here. The European governments are required to share with their people what are in these trade agreements, as opposed to here in the United States, where we're not allowed to know what's going on here until the government commits us to it. And by the way, that is absolutely a violation of the foundations of contract law in the United States of America, where all parties have to be fully aware of all requirements of a contract before they can be legally considered bound to it. But we now have this government that says, we can keep it secret, we will negotiate it, we will vote it through, and then after we've voted it through and it's the law of the land, then we'll give you the bad news. Same thing they did with Obamacare. But over in Europe, opposition is continuing to grow against the TTIP. Apparently, they were trying to schedule a new vote in the European Parliament, and it just descended into utter chaos because of the fury of the public reaction outside. And basically, the UKIP member of the European Parliament is saying that the EU is clearly running scared of the popular opposition to the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. As well they should be. All of these bodies are supposed to be subordinate to the will of the people. That's what democracy is. And the EU should be scared of the people of Europe. Washington, D.C. should be scared of the American people. When the people are scared of the government, you have tyranny. When the government is scared of the people, you have freedom. We need to get back there. We got to take a break for commercials. I know we've got a caller from North Carolina waiting on the line who wants to talk about this same subject. We'll get to you just as soon as we come back from these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And before we take this next phone call here, I'm watching the Fox News feed again, and yes, I probably ought to go on and switch to CNN, or actually, if I want more truth, I should go over to the Disney Channel. But you just step back and take a breath, and all of a sudden you realize just how many people in government and the media are trying to rationalize and justify and get us to accept this out-of-control, unconstitutional police brutality. Oh, we're just not understanding of what these police have to put up with. Everybody hates them. Well, we hate them because they're treating us badly. You know, we've long ago gone away from to protect and serve to we treat you like a king, as in Rodney. And they're almost acting like Israel. They want to go on out and be brutal and the rest of it and then say, you don't love us anymore. No, we don't love you. And it's because of how you behave. If you treat the American people as if we're animals, you're not going to get any respect from us. Anyway, let's take a phone call here. Mark up in North Carolina. Aloha, Mark. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. Yeah, that's not even what I wanted to talk about, but just to remind you, I just got out of law enforcement recently, and the reason I did, I just couldn't do it anymore because, you know, you get these idiots that would have been good for Hitler's SS, and unfortunately, if you then turn them in, you're considered a bad guy. You have that blue wall of silence. So I figured enough was enough. But anyway, what I wanted to really talk about was two things. One is Bilderberg and Bush, Jeb Bush. Where is Jeb Bush? Okay, he's in Europe. I think the reason they're having all that security, 2,000 cops surrounding that place, not letting anybody even near, okay, is because they're planning on flying Bush in there. Even though he lied and said he's not going there, I believe he is going there.
Could very well be. What's interesting is the Bilderbergers are now employing very sophisticated electronic jamming equipment. They're very concerned that somebody may have gotten a bug inside, or that somebody who's an invited guest is going to walk in with a tape recorder or something, and they've just got all these jammers working so that everything is deniable and everything is secret. They could very easily bring Bush in there as well. I'm surprised, they haven't flown Hillary in there.
Yeah, well, that's a possibility, too. Evidently, Obama and Hillary were at the 2008 Bilderberg conference in Virginia. That's another thing, too. Yesterday, I called somebody in Sirius XM, I think his name is Andrew Wilkow, and I told him, I started to talk about Bilderberg. He immediately shut me off, shut down the phone, and made some comment, and I heard later about, I'm not going to talk about nonsense like that. There's no such thing. This is with mainstream, not only mainstream media, but mainstream, what I call the talk radio mafia. They're probably as bad, if not worse, like the golfer, Limbaugh or Hannity and Beck. These guys are probably just as bad or worse than the mainstream media. And the other thing I wanted to talk about was with Greece. I hope that Greece does what Iceland does, and they say, you know what, we're not going to pay you. Who's getting the money anyway? A bunch of crooked banks that, swindle us in the first place, and we're just not going to pay. I really hope that happens. And as far as, TPP goes, I think Bilderberg is very much mixed in with TPP. They're pulling the strings. And I noticed they're running more and more ads on radio and TV, telling people to call their congressman and, push the so-called agreement. Now, I've called my congressman and said, no, under no terms, no way, no how. And I urge everybody to call your congressman saying no. They're trying to pull some kind of thing. They're saying supposedly that Congress will still have that dirtbag Paul Ryan was on TV the other day saying, oh, we just want to make sure, we're going to have Obama under control. I'm not just worried about Obama. I don't want any president having that kind of power. We don't need those trade agreements. You want to trade with somebody, trade with people who, like, the Japanese and the Germans. They'll build cars here. They'll pay wages very comparable to their own country, and we'll build, cars there, and they'll pay wages very comparable to our country. We don't need to, outsource to somebody that makes 50 cents an hour, where workers make 50 cents an hour, and then these corporations make a huge profit when they bring the stuff back.
Well, you need to understand that what is coming out with these trade agreements is less about the money and more about control of transferring openly and officially control over our lives from our civil governments to corporations. And one of the most alarming things that are in these treaties is they're going to have these arbitration courts set up which will allow corporations to challenge and overturn national laws. In other words, Monsanto will go to these courts and say, this country can't ban our GMO, it's restraint of trade, they're cutting into our profits, and under these trade agreements, the country will have to back down. We're already seeing that with this country of origin labeling situation with American meat, where, there used to be a law that any meat brought into our supermarkets, there had to be a little line on there saying where it originated. Was it grown in America? Did it come from Mexico? Was it flown in from Australia? And so forth. The World Trade Organization, which is an unelected body that serves corporate interests, just declared to the United States, because of the existing World Trade Organization treaty, that the U.S. cannot have that labeling anymore. And as a matter of fact, the House has already voted through a law to basically say you cannot label meat as to its origin any longer. And so
I called my husband about that too. I said, this isn't right. I mean, this is they're just usurping the Constitution of the United States. Only Congress makes the laws. We don't go by international bodies. That's totally unconstitutional. I just don't understand what's happening in this country anymore. They're destroying it. They're destroying it within. They're traitors running this place, and they're destroying it.
Well, they're unfortunately, they're all a bunch of whores, and in exchange for enough money, they'll sell out this country and its people to corporate interest. They'll sell out this country to anybody who can make their payment, whether it's Israel, the military-industrial complex, corporate interests. And Abraham Lincoln predicted, once the legal fiction of a corporation was created to allow wealth to accumulate across multiple generations in these corporations, he predicted the republic would ultimately be destroyed because the money power would be aggregated in these private hands. And there's something everybody needs to keep in mind, okay? Even as bad as our current system is, a civil government has to be responsive to the needs of the civil population, okay? Theocracies don't have to worry about that. Everything that they do is the will of God. And unfortunately, everything corporations do is the will of the stockholders. And so you're not going to get democracy or any kind of fair treatment from corporate governance. Corporate governance is all about exploiting the people for the stockholders. And that's exactly what it is.
Mike, I'm really concerned that Karl Marx's prediction is really coming true when he said, we'll hang the last capitalist with the rope he sold us. He didn't mean it. He meant it figuratively. And that's what's basically happening. We're letting an out-of-control capitalism. It's really not capitalism. It's corporate capitalism. I mean, it's predatory capitalism. Run wild, and it's going to destroy the entire free enterprise system of freedom. And we will have some kind of a dictatorship, whether it's going to be fascism, communism, or something,
No, it's not going to be communism. It's not going to be communism. Corporate rule is always going to be, the absolute distilled essence of fascism. All the wealth flows to the top. All the duties and obligations and costs flow to the bottom. There's absolutely no question. The New World Order is fascism.
Do you think the Soviet Union was really communist, or do you think they were basically fascist?
It started as communist, but ultimately its ruling class turned fascist. We got to take a break for commercials, Mark. Thank you for the phone call, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And by golly, I love the smell of burning irony in the morning here. BBC just ran a story about how they have discovered mad cow disease on an Ireland farm. First case of bovine spongiform encephalopathy since 2013. Now, call me picky. When I go down to the supermarket to the meat counter, I would like to know for a fact that the beef I am buying did not come from Ireland. Because every time they catch one of these animal diseases, they are always playing catch-up. There's always going to be a certain amount of beef or chicken or whatever that does get out there. And does it not make sense that we as shoppers should have a right to say, until this is settled down, I want to get beef from Argentina instead of Ireland? But according to the World Trade Organization, oh no, absolutely, you have no right to know if the meat you are buying is coming from a part of the world where they're dealing with one of these outbreaks. You don't need to know. If you get sick, I mean, we've got medicines and doctors and hospitals, and you can spend all of your money there to get well. When I was a kid, which admittedly was a long time ago, it was almost an axiom. Consumers had a right to know what was in their products. Now they don't want to tell you, because they know you're picking up on the fact that some of the things in those products really aren't there because they're good for you or nutritious or healthy. They're there because it saves money. It makes the product look more attractive somehow. Doesn't matter if it actually works or not, or is even harmful. Now, Paul Ryan is trying to protect a rider that's being tacked onto this fast-track bill that is going up for a vote tomorrow. Everybody knows that this will have to pass, and they're putting on all these riders and amendments. And apparently one of the riders that is in this Trade Promotion Authority bill will grant the executive branch massively expanded authority regarding immigration. In other words, giving Obama congressionally blessed authority to simply amnesty anybody who comes across the border, rather. Now, you remember back when they were ramrodding through the Obamacare Act, and that was all hush-hush. It was a huge stack of paper. And Nancy Pelosi came out with this bizarre statement about, we're going to have to vote and pass it before we can see what's in it, which was absurd. The job of every member of the Congress is to read the bills before they vote on them. And we have an epidemic of politicians who don't do that because they're too busy going out to lunch with the lobbyists and meeting with their donors and various other things like that. And now Paul Ryan has had his Pelosi moment. The trade agreement will be declassified and made public once it's agreed to. And they don't have to bother with the outrage of the American people like they're having to do in Europe. We can't have the American people tell us what to do here. What do they think this is, a democracy? Oh, they need to get a clue here. They're just here to work and breed soldiers and pay our bills and make our lives wonderful and otherwise just shut the heck up. But that's where we are right now, where Ryan is saying that it's going to be declassified and made public. You'll be allowed to see what's in it after it's already the law of the land. Now, another one of the riders on this Trade Assistance Act is talking about creating a $2.5 billion extension of the Trade Adjustment Assistance funding. This is a fund that is set up to assuage concerns that these trade bills, these trade agreements, are going to destroy American jobs. And the government is saying, yeah, they will. Get used to it. But don't worry, we're going to have money that we will give you so that you're not going to be upset over losing your job. Where are they getting the money for the Trade Adjustment Assistance funding? They're not digging into their own pockets. They're going to be cutting Medicare, funding to unions, seniors groups. So basically the government is saying these trade agreements are going to screw the American people. The only debate is just who gets screwed and for how much. But this is going to harm the American people. They're basically admitting it's going to harm the American people and saying it's none of your business until it's already a done deal. Now, one of the other provisions in the Trans-Pacific Partnership has been leaked through WikiLeaks. And basically, it establishes medical borders on countries. Now, as you are already aware, here in the United States of America, we have the most expensive health care on planet Earth. And it's a very poor quality. And we have seen a growing phenomenon called medical tourism, where people will go to another country to get something like a hip replacement, because they can get it there much, much cheaper. The quality is better. They get a vacation out of it, and they wind up not spending anywhere near as much money. There is a provision in the TPP saying that if you get sick in the United States of America, you are only allowed to get medical care in the United States of America. You're not allowed to go to another country to get a medication that sells for $100 down there, but it costs $30,000 here in the U.S. It's protectionism of profits from an inflated, bloated medical industrial complex. Nothing in the TPP is for the benefit of the American people. It's all about protecting corporate privilege and profit. Now, over in Great Britain, there's a big stink out there because the British government has declared that unemployment is a mental health issue. And they want to deal with the skyrocketing unemployment by having little workshops so that people who don't have jobs can develop a more positive mental attitude. Because after all, if they weren't mentally ill, they would have jobs here. They're basically what they're doing. They're rebranding unemployment as a psychological disorder. This is another way of blaming the victim and saying, well, it's your mental state is the reason you don't have a job, so that the government and the bankers can duck responsibility for the massive unemployment their economic policies have caused. It's not our fault you're all out of work. You just have the wrong mental attitude. You're thinking those double plus ungood thoughts. The Congressional Congressional Research Office, 40% of American adults are unemployed. But it's not the fault of Wall Street and Washington, D.C. They just have a poor mental attitude. That's what you're going to be hearing. Unemployment is a mental illness. Well, we've got a pill for that, which you can't afford because you don't have a job. Little bit of good news. Rupert Murdoch is finally stepping down as the CEO of Fox News. And a lot of people are saying it's about time because even though it's this giant corporation with investors, he's been running it like a personal family business. Fox News reports what Rupert Murdoch wants to put out there. Now, we don't know who's going to take his place and whether they're going to be just as agenda-driven as Rupert, but we'll take our little victories as they come on down. And by the way, if anybody from Fox News is out there listening, yeah, I could use a new job. Where would I send a resume if I wanted to be CEO of Fox News? I'll bet you I could get your ratings and audience up. All I got to do is tell the truth, and your numbers would be out through the clouds, and the advertisers would be pouring on in. We're coming up on our top of the hour news break. When we come back for hour number 3, a lot of stuff going on. More and more cash for favors allegations surfacing around Hillary Clinton going back to long before she was Secretary of State. It's been an ongoing, permanent fixture of the Clinton landscape. More bloviating from Bush about war and politics and vaccines, global warming, the rest of it. We'll be back with hour number 3 after this news break. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. So we're looking at this story out of the Washington Times, and as the furor grows regarding the Clinton Foundation and how much money they have taken in, how little has actually gone out for any charitable work, and the very close correlation between donations from foreign governments who then all of a sudden magically got their approval for arms sales run through the State Department. They're starting to look back at the foundation's finances from before Hillary Clinton's tenure as Secretary of State, and they're seeing more correlations. In other words, she was playing this exact same game when she was a senator. One example they put in the article, Hillary Clinton introduced a bill when she was New York's junior senator that allowed a donor to the Clinton Foundation to use tax-exempt bonds to build a shopping center in Syracuse, New York. She also supported Freddie Mac, working to defeat legislation that would have subjected the mortgage giant to tougher regulations before the 2008 housing bubble burst and led to a major recession. In other words, she was there protecting these Wall Street firms who were running up this giant real estate bubble and bundling all the mortgages in securities. Freddie Mac donated $100,000 to the Clinton Foundation. Politics, thy name is corruption. Now, Jeb Bush is out there talking war talk again. And I don't imagine that he understands just how war-weary the American people are, because the bellicosity is just growing. Jeb Bush is out there calling Putin a bully, which is nonsense. Putin's got nothing to do with what's going on in Ukraine. It was the U.S. coup d'etat, January of last year, that started this mess. But Jeb Bush is out there saying that there will be consequences for Russia if he is elected President of the United States of America, which I think is a very good reason to make sure that he is not elected President of the United States of America. There's a link between Bushes and wars. He even said it himself. He was out there yesterday saying, forget all about my brother's war in Iraq and remember my father's war against the Soviet Union. And the message is, with Bush, you get war. We've had enough wars. Wars to make the rich guys richer, to make us poorer, to kill and cripple our children. And wars started with lies about weapons of mass destruction that don't exist, how bad all these governments are to their people that we're kicking out, and ignoring how much worse life gets for those people under U.S. puppet rule. Go back, do this research yourself. Go back to Google and get pictures of life in Iraq before all these U.S. invasions, and now get pictures of life in Iraq today. Very clearly, life has gone downhill for the people of Iraq under U.S. puppet rule, which is a foregone conclusion. Life went downhill for the people of Iran following the 1953 coup d'etat and installation of the Shah. Same thing in Chile in 1973. Same thing in Guatemala. Now, Ben Carson is out there with an idea to improve the economy and make government more efficient. He wants to set up yet another federal government agency that will spy on the federal government. We're going to have the workers spying on one another. That doesn't increase our productivity, doesn't increase the number of products that we have for sale. It's just another waste of money. And it's not going to work. Because human beings, even government workers, tend to react very badly to that kind of oppressive surveillance. Remember when we went through that episode of postal workers going berserk? It happened because the post office management was in there trying to too tightly control how the postal workers were working. They were bringing in all these consultants that literally went down to exactly how the wrist should be flicked to get the mail into the mailbox. And the postal workers flipped out, probably exacerbated by antidepressants. The only way we're going to fix the economy is to have more of our labor and energy focused on manufacturing products that people want to buy, or growing agricultural produce that people want to buy. Not just come up with all these trade bills that will say your customers will buy our products. We don't care if they're junk and terrible and harmful and dangerous. The trade agreement says they have to buy and use these. Over in Nevada, GOP Congressman Crescent Hardy was at a Libertarian Party event, and he made this really bizarre statement that he hoped his children would never be a drain on society like people who are disabled. I can't even fathom what was going through his mind for him to make such a stupid statement. Obviously, we all hope our children will never be disabled. I don't know what he's thinking. Time to get rid of these useless eaters. They're disabled people. We can't make a profit with them. Time to just let them go. And by the way, that will be an aspect of corporate rule of planet Earth. You will be kept alive only so long as you are working and productive and generating a profit. The instant you become a cash sink, send them over to the euthanasia booth. We're getting into Soylent Green kind of dystopian realities here. Now, Bernie Sanders was being interviewed yesterday on the Diane Rim Show on WAMU. And Sanders, of course, is running for the White House, and so far he's the least objectionable of the candidates who are out there. And apparently, Diane Rim basically came out and challenged him on being a dual national with Israel. And, of course, Sanders snapped at her because that's an unfounded allegation being used to tarnish him. Yes, he's Jewish, but he's not a dual citizen with Israel. He's an American citizen, period, end of discussion. And Diane should have done a little more due diligence, and Bernie was right to snap at her. Because we all need to stand up to the liars in the corporate media and the government when they are lying and saying, I know you're lying, I don't believe you, why are you wasting both of our times with this nonsense? Now, Rick Santorum had a rally for his campaign for president. One person showed up. Rick decided to maybe not bother with the speechification, decided to have his lunch there before he went to his next event here. Maybe it's time for Rick Santorum to borrow Mitt Romney's Photoshop artist. Remember all those really badly done Photoshops of Mitt Romney's crowds during the 2012 election? And they were so badly done, and everybody was saying, of course we know he didn't have the crowd. Meanwhile, of course, Ron Paul got real crowds that were that large. They didn't need to Photoshop anything, but, oh no, we can't talk about Ron Paul. It's because he's so popular with the people that we have to keep him out here because we can't have a government that actually listens to the people. The government must listen to the corporations, and the government must listen to Israel, and the government must listen to the military-industrial complex because that's what makes America great. Kind of wonder what drugs they're on over there in Washington, D.C. Maybe it's all those antique buildings and the lead pipes or something. I don't know. Now, the Department of Homeland Security is out there determined to find the leaker of that report on how 96% of the simulated guns, bombs, and weapons got past the TSA. That was not supposed to be something you were allowed to know. Kind of makes you wonder what other major failures are inside the government that are still hidden, waiting for a leaker. And again, they're not going to fix the problem. They just want to slap around the people who made it public. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And this is the segment of the program where we get to pick on the F-35 again, our favorite little boondoggle. And we have been reporting on all the myriad problems of what is the world's most expensive weapons development program. They have spent the equivalent of Australia's annual gross domestic product trying to build this thing. And the problems are legion. Early naval version couldn't land on carriers. They had to redesign and retrofit the tailhook. Can't fly in the fog. Can't fly near lightning. Can't fly in the rain. Helmet control, fire control system still not deliverable. Software for the onboard cannon expected somewhere in 2019. Is being outflown by the contemporary in-service Russian-Chinese fighters. And it's got an embarrassing habit of setting itself on fire during takeoff. And here is where it gets interesting, because apparently the Pentagon has known for years this was a problem. As early as 2007, engineers were warning that there was an issue with fuel leaking into the engine compartment, leading to a fire. Tests had confirmed this was a design flaw in 2013. But they just keep on putting pilots in there and saying, you know, go on off to the wild blue yonder, good luck. Hope you make it to the end of the runway. It reminds me of the scandal over the F-16, which had a known problem with the wiring harness chafing against the frame during high G maneuvers. And it had an amazing combat record, being unbeatable against an enemy, but it killed dozens and dozens of the pilots from the electrical systems quitting. And there was a big cover-up. There was even a movie about it. I'm trying to remember the name of the movie. But it was an issue, and there was a big lawsuit by the widow of one of the pilots, and somebody leaked to her videotapes and manuals that said, yeah, they know there's a problem, they're just trying to work around it, duct tape, baling wire, whatever they were doing. This is another reason for us to be very, very careful about going into a new war against a military peer like China or Russia, because they're not our peers, they're our superior. When China and Russia invest in developing a weapon system, the goal is a workable, usable weapon system. Under the United States military-industrial complex, when they invest in a weapon, it's just an excuse to siphon off vast amounts of money. And they'll add things because the contracts are all what are called cost plus. Whatever the military contractor spent to build it, plus a percentage. So the more expensive they can make the weapon, the more profit they make. And they add things and add things and add things until they're bloated with junk. It's confusing to the pilots. The stuff doesn't really work. I mean, one of the F-35's concepts was called the transparent cockpit, where there are cameras all over the outside of the aircraft. And as the pilot looks around in his $400,000 each helmet, he's seeing the view from the TV cameras so that he can actually look through the aircraft and see things that are underneath that would normally be hidden by the way, which sounds like a really good idea, except they can't get the imagery to line up. There's supposed to be a system in which the F-35 is able to see, detect, and track multiple targets and then network that information with the rest of the squadron. The software doesn't work. It'll give them ghost targets. It'll see one target and display it as 4 or 5, depending upon how many cameras are looking at it. Can't synthesize it. It all sounded really good on the drawing board and in the sales brochure. They can't get it to work. And now they know it's been liable to blow up on takeoff since 2007. Reminds me of the scandal of the M16. As we were getting stuck in that war we were going to lose ultimately in Vietnam, there was a debate going on in the Pentagon between adopting the M14 combat rifle and a new design called the M16, designed by Armalite. And everybody in the Pentagon weapons procurement was thinking in terms of those companies they were buddy-buddy with, had stock in, were going to give them, very cushy, comfortable consulting positions after they retired from military life. And there was a huge push supporting the M14 rifle. The rationale behind the M14 was it used exactly the same ammunition as the M30 machine gun, therefore logistics would be simple. That was the rationale. The M16 was clearly a superior design. And the Pentagon decided to give it a field trial, which turned into a disaster. The guns kept jamming, and they kept finding soldiers in Vietnam with the prototype M16s disassembled around them with the cleaning kit, trying to unjam them. And the Pentagon said, see, the M16 is dangerous, it's not working, we need to go with the M14. Congress was required to investigate when it came out that the Pentagon had intentionally provided the wrong kind of ammunition for the M16, ammunition that it was known would foul and jam the action on the gun. Congress finally took the step of telling the Pentagon, you're going to go with this M16 design. which has become the framework for so many other weapons since then. And even then, the Pentagon couldn't let go of tinkering. If you have an AR-15 or derivative weapon, you probably notice on the right-hand side there's this plunger that's there to slam the bolt home. Nobody ever uses it. The Pentagon demanded it be added to the original design, complicating the manufacture and increasing its cost because they felt that soldiers psychologically needed to have something they could hit with their hand to reassure themselves the gun was loaded. Throw back to the old bolt-action design. Totally useless. And yet every variant since then has had this plunger, and nobody uses it. It's all about money, and it's corruption, and the Pentagon officials are perfectly willing to see young Americans get killed with inferior weapons or even superior weapons because that's just the price they pay. By the way, somebody sent me an email. Apparently, the Pentagon Wars is out there on YouTube in its entirety. I'm not exactly sure that's legal for them to do, but as long as it's there, go to YouTube, do a web search, The Pentagon Wars, watch that movie. It is based on the true story of the Bradley Infantry Fighting Vehicle. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, there's an interesting development going on here, and I'm going to preface it by taking a step back and addressing the issue. Everybody's always wondering, we're seeing all these financial crimes that are being reported. They're openly admitting into it. The corporations are fine. Nobody goes to jail. You know, is it just political cronyism or favoritism? Yeah, that's a big part of it. But you need to understand there are actually two different court systems operating within the federal government. Because many of these federal government agencies operate something called the administrative law courts. These are courts organized and operated by federal government agencies like the Securities Exchange Commission. Now, these administrative law courts, which can make decisions based on federal regulation, do not have the authority to sentence anybody to prison. They are not criminal courts. They're administrative courts. They came into being as part of Roosevelt's New Deal. But they can impose fines. Now, in a 45-page ruling, U.S. District Judge Leigh Martin May has declared these administrative law courts are unconstitutional. They're a violation of the Appointments Clause of the Constitution because these agencies just throw these courts together. The judges in them are not appointed as judges in civil and criminal courts are. And the ramifications of this are that after 81 years of abuse by the administrative court system, it's finally being acknowledged they are unconstitutional. And they never had any real authority to go after people. It was just another system that was put in there to say, we have decided you owe our agency so many thousands of dollars. And it's going to be cheaper for you to pay the fine than to try and fight us with lawyers. It's another reminder that some of the biggest lies you have been told by this government stretch back for decades. 81 years, 101 years. Never let the government or the corporate media, and certainly not the Common Core textbooks, tell you what the Constitution and Bill of Rights says. Take it upon yourself to go back to the original text and read it for yourself. Because everybody who wants to interpret it for you is doing so out of self-interest. And again, going back to that, the way the Common Core completely rewrote the Second Amendment to change the meaning. You have a right to keep and bear arms as part of a state militia. They're brainwashing our kids that the Bill of Rights are gifts by the government that can be rescinded when the government chooses. No, that's not it. The Bill of Rights recognize the pre-existing rights of the people. It's basically a keep out sign for the U.S. government. Do not trespass. That's what the Bill of Rights really comes down to. It's that barbed wire around the American people, across which the government may not come. The government cannot give rights. It can only give privileges to particularly obedient servants and slaves. This is a significant ruling. You're not going to hear anything about this in the corporate media. But it's very significant. It undermines the unconstitutional authority of a great many of these federal government agencies who've been out there saying, we can do this and we can do that. Not just the SEC, USDA, FDA, Minerals Management Service, all of these agencies have been running these administrative law courts. And they're unconstitutional. Now, getting on back to the P5+1, there's a big stink growing over the fact that Kaspersky Labs have uncovered a very sophisticated piece of spyware that they say links back to Israel that has been spying on all the hotels where the negotiators for the P5+1 have been staying. This is not somebody's amateur night hack job. They're saying their estimate is to duplicate it would cost about $10 million. This is the product of a nation state. The United States is out there saying, oh, don't be silly. The nuclear talks are very secure. I mean, where the U.S. has taken steps to ensure the confidentiality of the nuclear negotiations with Iran. They borrowed Hillary's private email server or something like that. This in the wake of the fact that Obama has expressed anger with Israel for leaking the inside secrets of the P5+1 negotiations to pet congressmen in the U.S. who then proceeded to try and derail the agreement. So you have the U.S. officially saying Israel isn't spying on the negotiations. At the same time, the White House is saying, yeah, Israel is spying on the negotiations and feeding information to members of Congress opposed to the P5+1 agreement. Now, here's a very, very bizarre story. This came out of Der Spiegel, where Kaspersky has come under attack itself from a piece of malware that appears linked to the notorious Dooku software, which has been linked to Israel. And this time, Kaspersky is the target, and Der Spiegel is saying out there, experts are trying to find who's behind it, okay? Kaspersky uncovers Israeli spyware at the P5+1, then Kaspersky gets attacked by Israeli spyware, and Der Spiegel doesn't know who's behind it? Because Der Spiegel is in Germany, and in Germany it's against the law to criticize Israel, so we're just going to pretend we have no idea where this came from. Israel, of course, is denying that it bugged the talks on Iran's nuclear program, but then Israel insists it's never spied on the United States of America, despite the AIPAC spy scandal, the Israeli spy scandal that was big news just before 9/11. Israel denied it attacked the USS Liberty. Then when they were forced to admit it, said it was all the weather. Now, the Swiss government has stepped in on this because apparently they located a house in Geneva from which the spy attack on the hotels was traced, and they've arrested the occupant and confiscated all that computer equipment. So the Swiss government has their own investigation. I don't think the Swiss are going to be all that willing to protect Israel's hand in it, if in fact that's what their investigation shows. If you are living in Alaska, I hope you're enjoying your summer. The snow is forecast for parts of Denali National Park, and everybody's going to say, well, that's Alaska, they're always cold. Not so. During summer, they get sun anywhere from 20 to 22 to above the Arctic Circle 24 hours a day. It actually does get very warm in Alaska normally. Now they're getting snow. Now, the ocean off of Iceland is apparently so cold there is no mackerel crop this year. Normally, this time of year, they're out there fishing for mackerel. They're getting all the, the fish to bring in for the fish market. Not there. Remember we were talking about all these fish farms? That part of the world, it was so cold the water froze and the fish died. Last month was the coldest May Iceland has had in decades. And the carbon Nazis are still out there. Global warming, global warming, global warming, absolutely global warming. You will believe as we tell you to believe, and if you won't believe, we'll waterboard you. They're starting to get really hysterical This whole human-caused global warming scam is falling apart, and that's why they're piling on all these corporate media stories. And we got a whopper for you when we come back from these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're talking about the carbon Nazis are out at it again. They're just absolutely determined that they're going to sell you this lemon that the world is warming and it's all your fault and the planet is suffering if you don't pay a carbon tax. So I was over at the UK Independent, and you need to remember, this is the newspaper which back on March 20th, 2000, ran the banner headline, "Snow and ice are now a thing of the past." And they're back today with a new one. Polar bears seen killing and eating dolphins that have been forced north by global warming. And they're talking about a report by scientists how polar bears were seen eating dolphins. And the spin is, oh, well, the dolphins were forced north by warmer waters, which is nonsense. We have dolphins here in Hawaii. They're not bothered by warm water. And there's nothing unusual about polar bears eating dolphins. Polar bears are omnivorous. They'll eat dolphins, sea lions, fish, stupid people, whatever they can get. Now, there was a direct quote from the original article in this article in the Independent, so I did a Google search, and I found the original scientific report about this. And it turns out this incident happened in April of last year. It's not current news. And in the original report, the scientists said the dolphins were trapped by ice, and that's what allowed the polar bears to catch them. The Independent blatantly rewrote this to sell this human-caused global warming. These dolphins were not turned into bear poo by global warming. They were turned into bear poo by excessive ice. And I did, within the body of my posting of this on whatreallyhappened.com, I did link to that original report. The dolphins were constrained by ice. They weren't shoved up there by warm water. Cetaceans love warm water. We have whales and dolphins all over here. All right, let's go ahead and take a phone call. Last phone call of the day. Larry in Florida. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, how you doing? I have kind of changing the topic, if I may, a police scandal of the Miami-Dade Police Department.
Oh, yet another one. Go ahead.
Okay, do you remember the case? It was a Facebook case of August of 2013.
Mm-hmm.
Derek Medina had shot and killed his wife in self-defense and posted her picture on Facebook.
Okay.
Do you remember that?
Vaguely.
Okay, vaguely. Okay, I was in Florida at the time. That's my stepson.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And it's a big-time scandal, big-time cover-up. Essentially, I got a blog that they suppressed 4 minutes and 26 seconds from his interrogation video.
Okay.
Can I, it doesn't have to be on air, but, at some point, can I do I wrote 3 blog pieces.
Okay, well, you can mention them on the air, but we're running out of time. It would probably be good if you email them to me so I can link to them from What Really Happened.
Yeah, let me do that. I mean, I don't, I'm dead space on the air right now, and I apologize. And I didn't call I just wanted to get you guys' interest to show that, hey, this is the case. I got, evidence. It sounds hokey.
No, it doesn't. Not in this day and age. It does not sound hokey. And we're talking to so many of these other people. We live in an age where the American people are ready to look at alternative explanations for what officialdom has said. And we have about 6 more minutes here, and I'm willing to let you take the remaining 6 minutes to talk about what happened, given that you're 1 degree of separation away. Basically, you're telling us that the Miami-Dade police have covered up some aspect of this case that would have exonerated your stepson.
Yes. His wife, she was high on bath salts. She's a lot of people knew her, knew that she was on bath salts, but it's something that they covered up. Her test results came back clean. She was violent. Derek doesn't hit women. He doesn't hit his child. It just, they made him out to be a monster because of, a fight had escalated to the point where, she had a knife, a chef's knife in her hand in the kitchen, and she was threatening to kill herself or to kill him. He took the knife out of her hand, put it in a drawer, and she started to wail at him again. She was wailing, punching him throughout the morning. And she throws overhand fists. And he shot and killed her. And he was shocked. He put his gun back upstairs, told his stepdaughter, who was upstairs, stay in your room, took a picture of her as he was leaving the house, put it on Facebook so they can, know that his daughter was in the house and they can take her out. And went to his uncle's house, his father, in the neighborhood, and his father came by and he wanted to turn himself in. Okay. And he did so.
Okay, now before I let you go any further, I want to clarify something for our listeners. When you use the term bath salts, that is slang. There are designer drugs that are out there, and because they're very new, they're not scheduled, they're not illegal, they're sold in certain stores under the heading of bath salts. They're not actually used for the bath. They're like variations of meth that have not yet been declared illegal, put on the schedule of banned substances, and because they are altered molecules, they will not show up in the tox screens administered to people by the police, and it's this big underground situation, and that's what he means by the bath salts. It's a quasi-legal recreational drug, but just like regular meth, they are very, very dangerous. Just like antidepressants, they can trigger episodes of extreme rage and violence, and if they're concealing that part of the case, then, justice is not being served, because it does seem to get into the area of reasonable doubt whether it was just outright murder or, in point of fact, a killing during self-defense.
Self-defense, yeah. And ironically, the Miami-Dade Police Department, the crime scene lab, did extensive research on bath salts. And I have that link, I have that paper. And they go through, and I essentially, in another paper, used their work on how they didn't want to. It's actually, you can, and it's fairly easy with the equipment that we have today to detect it if you're looking for it.
Yeah, but they have to be looking for it. They have to be looking for it. Yeah. No, it's a big problem. We had a store here near where I live that was selling all this stuff, and the rose in a glass tube was actually just a way to sell a crack pipe without calling it a crack pipe. Fortunately, that store has gone out of business now. But it is an issue. We've only got 2 minutes left here, so Larry, I just want to reiterate, please email me the URLs to your blog, and we'll put it up there. We are seeing so many abuses by the police, by prosecutors. They just want to score points on the record. We got this guy for killing his wife, and they're not interested in exonerating or any of the circumstances. They're just there keeping score. It's like a sporting event. I put away more guys than you did, kind of a situation. And this day and age, though, people are willing to seriously entertain that there may be a different view of what the government says happened.
It's real simple.
Okay.
Blog 426, like the time, blog 426.
Okay.
Larry
Okay, we've got a bad phone connection here, so again, you need to email me those to make sure I got the right spelling, okay?
What's your email?
WRH@whatreallyhappened.com. If you go to my website, it just says right up at the top there in the white little bar, it says email WRH. You click it, it'll bring up your mail client, and you can just send that on in, okay?
Okay, hey, what's your first name? And I apologize that I don't know your name.
My name is Michael. And
Michael, thank you.
Okay.
Go ahead.
All right. Well, again, the email address to send that URL to is WRH, Whiskey Romeo Hotel @whatreallyhappened.com. and I'll get it, and I'll definitely take a look at it. We are out of time here, Larry. I need to let you go. I wish you luck with your stepson. It does sound like there's been yet another of these endless series of miscarriages of justice. So we're going to let you go. I got to get on out of here and get some other work done for the rest of the day. We'll be back tomorrow, Friday, Pauhana Friday, here on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, stay safe, stay informed, stay skeptical, make good choices. Please call your local talk radio stations, direct them to gcnlive.com. Ask them to start carrying our program because you're sick of the corporate media lies. It is time for the truth to prevail in this country. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.